we can get ready. Great. Good to see everyone. Good evening. Welcome back to a Gem Talk this Wednesday night in the month of August. Great to see all of you guys. Great to be able to spend time with you guys online. And we're kicking off a new series, which is exciting. And we're going to be addressing some key emotions that I think people will be feeling right now. So what are we going to be talking about today? And what are you guys going to be talking about? Because remember that Gem Talk is also a time
to talk
for us all to talk. It's a time when Gem talks. That's why we call it Gem Talk. And so we really want all of you guys, thank you. Thanks for that one solitary laugh that was out there. Made me feel encouraged. That's why we have these times, right? It's not just a lesson. It's not just a lecture, but it's really a time for all of us to share and to meet some friends, to talk with people, and to really just make some connections and really strengthen one another. That's why we do this in community. Today we're talking about loneliness and isolation.
Hey, did you
there's a screen?
Unblocked windows, bro.
Yeah, that one.
This one you can see, right? My notes.
The top.
I can see a square.
Yeah,
It's censored. Don't worry.
Okay, hold on.
Sorry.
How about?
I don't think we need censored notes, bro.
All right, hold on. How's about? Can you still see it now or no? No, sharing is paused.
It moved to the bottom now.
We can see like a long rectangle on the bottom and a bit on the top as well, I think.
Okay.
Oh, that's the
Hey,
zoom.
Teach,
The zoom.
it's probably because you press optimize sharing for video. You gotta stop
Oh,
okay.
okay. Let me
Thank you,
just
Marsh.
give me a sec. Marsh is
reshare without the optimize for video.
okay. Hold on.
Okay.
Let
Or
me
you
just.
can just
let
share
me
like
just,
the portion of the screen as well.
I could, but then I can't see the. What do you call it? How do I? Okay, here we go.
Thanks, guys, for your patience.
Thank you, guys. Bear with me a sec here. We're doing this. We're getting there. All right. So don't optimize for video clip. Let's not do that. Thank you, Marshall. I just want my notes up here as well as I share. All right. So test. How is that now, guys? Can you see that?
Yes.
Nothing blocking it. Perfect. Wonderful. Great.
Good,
Thank
because I
you.
spent a lot of effort for the illustration.
Yes, my wife made these wonderful slides using a great template. I don't think she drew them herself, but she did choose them. So we're going to be talking about loneliness and isolation, right? And I think this is, we had a discussion with we have a Gem Talk planning committee, for those of you who don't know. Very important meeting, very important people. We discuss, basically we try to pick topics that are going to be helpful for everyone at the times that we're in. And I think all of us are going through unprecedented times, right? We've been over a year and a half into this pandemic now, and we still haven't been able to meet officially as a church. Maybe we've met with a few friends here and there, or we've met with some small kind of group meetings, but we haven't been able to do church the way we used to. We haven't been able to do, hanging out and friendship the way we used to. And, perhaps we're trying to get along with life as best as we can. Perhaps we're just trying to keep our heads down and just power through this. But have we really stopped and reflected on how are we feeling right now? More than 18 months into a shock to the system, 18 months of a pandemic where life has changed as we know it. The way we do relationships have changed. How are we doing? Because I think for some of us, we tend to feel like, well, I'm an extrovert, maybe for those of you who feel like you're an extrovert, so I don't get lonely. But actually, anyone can feel lonely, not just introverts. Extroverts too can feel lonely. And sometimes I'm actually more of an introverted person, surprisingly. And sometimes I look at extroverts, I'm like, no, they never get lonely, because this is how I think when I see extroverts. This is basically what I imagine.
My name's Katrina. And my name is Hugh. I'm Sarah. I'm Emma. And I'm Joe to you. Hello, my name is Spencer. And mine is Lorraine. I'm Anthony. I'm Debbie. And my name is Abby.
That's kind of what I think of when I think about extroverts, and I
Jame.
Yeah, I kind of imagine, my name is Jame, and my name is Marsh, and hey, I'm Calvin, hey, I'm Sandy, hey, I'm Ale. But not all of us, can necessarily feel that way, but actually we all get lonely at times, right? It doesn't matter how many interactions you think you have or how full a schedule you kind of pack in your day, we can still end up feeling lonely. In fact, we can even be lonely in marriage.
Yeah.
Just because we're married doesn't mean that we won't at times feel loneliness.
Yeah.
So this is why we're talking about this tonight, because we've been going through times where isolation has been the kind of situations that we've been experiencing we've never experienced before. And so we just really wanted to help you guys to explore this topic and really understand it, and hopefully be able to see how God can help in this situation. So what is a definition of loneliness? This comes from the a Harvard journal. And basically it says loneliness is the gap between the social connections you would like to have and those you feel you currently experience, right? So it's that gap between how you feel you should be socially interacting with people and where you feel like you're at now, right? So feeling lonely is not something that is wrong. It's not something that means that there's something wrong with you. In fact, it means that there's something right with you. There's a professor from the University of Chicago. He's actually an expert in the field of loneliness and the psychology of loneliness. His name is John Cacioppo, and Sonia is going to share a bit about his research. But he said this about loneliness. He said, it's just like if I were to provide a painful stimulus to your arm. Let's say I was to pinch your arm. You would withdraw your arm and complain being hurt. That's not something you learn. That's instinctive. Loneliness is a mechanism that's in place because we need, as a social species, to be able to identify when our connections with others are lacking. We are actually created for relationships. So loneliness is an indicator that there's something wrong, that we're not connecting in the way that God desires, the way that God created us to connect. Because we as humans, I believe this, and I think there's a lot of research and scripture that we could share that shows that we are created to thrive on relationships. So it's really important that we see that, and we are able to see that loneliness is not something wrong with you. Actually, it's indicating that there's something perhaps right with you. So we may ask ourselves questions like this. Maybe Sonia, you want to share this?
Yeah. Do I have a friend that really truly knows who I am? Do I fit in my environment? Do I feel like I have a sense of belonging? Do I have certain people I can tell my troubles to, that I don't have to, I can really be honest about how I'm feeling and I can feel safe? If I enter a Zoom room, maybe now, is my arrival both anticipated and welcomed? Loneliness may also just be a short-term feeling. It could also be something that you grew up with. If for those of you who have been following our Gem Talks, you've been able to follow our schema series just a few months ago, where we talked about childhood experiences really shaping the way that we think and we see others and see ourselves. And so these schemas like mistrust, if we have a hard time trusting people, even in this pandemic, even before COVID face-to-face, and we'll definitely have a harder time even now if we're driven by mistrust. If we are driven by emotional deprivation and we haven't received a lot of love growing up, we'll constantly feel unloved and lonely. Maybe that's not reality, but it's because of how we've been treated in our early years. Social isolation, if we've moved around a lot when we were young, or our parents were not very social individuals, then we can often imitate those same patterns. Negativity, if we feel like at the end of the day, people are going to disappoint me and there's no point really investing in others, that can also contribute to feelings of loneliness. And then abandonment is the feeling that at the end of the day, the people I love are going to leave me anyway. And that can contribute to loneliness and cause trouble to our hearts. So this is just something for you to be aware of, to just think a little bit, what are the causes? How are you feeling? Some other causes are grief and loss, which we've talked about extensively, even with Tante Alice, with the depression and anxiety Gem Talk, right? it's this feeling that I've lost something, and I'm not sure if people can relate to me. It doesn't have to be a person, it can be a job or an idea or a way of life. Maybe a life transition, feeling stagnant, left behind, or seeing that, you know what, I actually don't have support that I need, and that's contributing to my loneliness. I need more support. That takes courage to admit that, you know. So these are just some contributing factors
towards feeling lonely. So there are two simple points that we really kind of want to draw out, both in terms of our introduction here, but also in the wonderful guest speakers that we're going to have sharing a little bit of their lives. The first is the reality. You know, what is the reality of loneliness? How does it affect us? And how does God also relate to us in that feeling? So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the remedy. What are the solutions? How can we turn to God and see God as someone that actually can comfort us, can heal us, can lift us up when we are stuck feeling lonely? So let's start with the reality. What is the reality of loneliness? Before we jump into that, let us have a little Menti survey. And so go over to Menti and type in 5663-1471. So menti.com 5663-1471. And we just have one question that we want you guys to answer yourself. Since the start of the pandemic, have you felt any of the following over there in the Menti? So have a look over there. 5663 and see if that's working. I'm going to have a little look as well on mine just to make sure it's loading up here. Then I'm going to share screen. So have a look at Menti. I'm going to present it over here. Should be. All right, it should be working. 5663-1471. And let me go over to that and share that with you guys. So let's hear from you guys. Since the start of the pandemic.
Not really working.
Not really working. Okay, let me try it again. Hold on.
Refresh it, yeah.
I'm just refreshing it now. All right. 5663-1471. Do you want to try it again? See if anyone can get into that.
I think Menti might be experiencing a crash or something right now.
Is there just too many people using it? Hold on. Let me try sharing a link to it. If this doesn't work, don't worry. But let's just see if this can work. It's not working, is it? It's not really loading it, is it? I don't know if that link would work. Presentation is no longer active. Okay, I think it's not working. That's okay. That's all right. Never mind. It's okay. Sometimes it doesn't work. I don't know why. Seems like it's queued up here, but all right. I think we'll leave that. So I wanted to ask, you know, what have you guys been feeling basically? Maybe you can, if you're willing to, you can type in the chat to what extent, or maybe you can just raise a hand if you like, or give a reaction if to some extent during this pandemic you've been struggling with feeling isolated or feeling not as close to people as you used to, feeling lonely, feeling like no one truly knows me. Wanted to see kind of the spread of how many people are also feeling that, because I think that's something that a lot of people have been talking about since the start of this pandemic. A lot of people have been talking about the topic of loneliness, and a lot of research has been coming out, and a lot of news articles have been coming out on the topic. And I think it's something that we've all been feeling, right, to some extent. How many feel lonely on a regular basis? Around 61%, and this is prior to the pandemic, right? That's from this is from an article from a Harvard magazine called The Loneliness Pandemic. So 61% report that they feel lonely on a regular basis. Then there's some interesting research which talks about the risk to health of loneliness.
Yeah. So this was from surveys for those who are single, married, engaged, dating, whatever, that loneliness after a certain period can actually heighten someone's, I guess, their can actually quicken the mortality rate, right? Which means enable them to be more susceptible to death, including being equivalent to 15 cigarettes a day, or the same effects of being an alcoholic. And that was quite staggering to me. This also includes things like high blood pressure and heart disease. And this was not just done as a one-time research. This has been over the past 20 years of different things coming out with our health if we don't address our loneliness. And we keep it inside. That was quite astounding to me.
Wow.
Researchers have also called loneliness the real pandemic. They called it the loneliness pandemic before the COVID pandemic, actually, because they realized that this is a problem that so many people don't address in their life. And the past 20 years, like I said, we've seen the most research on the issue.
So one of the interesting things about loneliness is it's unique as a condition, because what happens is it actually perpetuates itself.
Yeah.
When we feel, for example, we feel hungry, we tend to eat. When we feel physically weak, we go see a doctor. When we feel lonely, we tend to cut ourselves off from others.
Yeah.
Because we feel misunderstood, we feel frustrated, we feel abandoned. We actually tend, the way we cope with loneliness for the most part is actually by isolating. And can you see how negative a feedback cycle that can become, right? When we start to feel lonely, we start to withdraw, and then we feel lonelier, and then we withdraw even more.
Yeah.
And we get stuck in this this isolated feeling. And this is what the University of Chicago professor that I mentioned, John Cacioppo, has proven with his research, that people that feel this tend to get stuck. The other thing he says is when you feel lonely, you get more defensive. Your brain is focusing more on self-preservation than the preservation of those around you. This in turn can make you less pleasant to be around. Over time, this can increase the likelihood of negative social interactions. So if you have been feeling irritable lately, which I have to confess, I've been feeling easily irritated and triggered. And perhaps an explanation of this is, could I be feeling lonely?
Yeah.
According to JC, this is John Cacioppo, not Jesus Christ. That might be the case. That might be the case.
We will quote Jesus Christ.
But there will be some real JC quotes coming. Just you wait. So what other aspects worsen loneliness or isolation? Reductions of social contact, like we've been experiencing throughout this pandemic. Increased anxiety for the future. You may have also been feeling that. We get worried about what's going to happen in the future, my job, my career, relationships, my family, health, travel plans, everything. And we get anxious. We get stuck in negative thinking. And that can also lead to a worsening of our isolation. We tend to deal with those ourselves. And if you're like me, avoidant behavior. And I know for me that when I'm feeling isolated or I'm feeling lonely, it's hard for me to open up and talk about it. And I think, in preparing for this talk, I've been really trying to reflect on, have I been feeling lonely? I mean, I speak to a lot of people. I have a lot of interactions with people. It's not for lack of interaction with people, but I can often just get busy and distract myself by being busy, because it's easier to be busy than it is to talk about what's really going on in my heart. And so I think, yes, I do feel I have been feeling lonely throughout this pandemic, and not being aware of it because I distract myself from just being busy and work, but actually it catches up with me later, and I'm left feeling burnt out. I'm left feeling tired. I'm feeling drained. And I'm missing the quality of the relationships and the way that I used to enjoy them before the pandemic. So I've been reflecting on that, because how do I move forward? Because I could just get stuck in this feeling, this sense of loneliness can just overwhelm my life, and I could get stuck here. But I've been also trying to reflect on, how do I reframe this time of my life and kind of get a spiritual perspective to help me move forward.
Yeah. I think maybe it was God's plan that TJ and I shared this topic, because this week, I think we were experiencing a lot of loneliness. I know for me, I just had to, I love what TJ said about just admitting it to yourself first. And I've had to just really kind of just put my phone aside, put my distractions aside, and just say, God, I feel lonely. Like this is, I miss my friends. I definitely miss my family. I thought my family would be able to see Oliver grow up, and especially in the first 2 years of his life, and they haven't really been able to do that much. I never thought, you know, for almost a whole year, I would only see my mom for 10 days of that year. And I think I have been stretched. I've been stressed from different things in my life. And I think I started to see Jesus in a new way when I looked at the ways that Jesus felt lonely. And we see here, Jesus felt lonely with friendships. The one time where he was the most vulnerable with them, he said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And then he returned and he found his disciples sleeping. You know, that here he has poured out himself for 3 years. And then the time where his closest friends needed him the most, they couldn't be there. Jesus experienced loneliness in society. In Isaiah 53, it said, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, right? With Christ, he was despised and rejected by mankind. You know, he was a man familiar with pain. So I first had to see that Jesus actually feels my pain, because sometimes I don't feel that way. I don't feel like God feels my pain. And I had to really get in touch with that first. He felt lonely with relatives, you know, because he was from Nazareth, and even with his own family, they were skeptical of him. And he said in Luke 4, truly, I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. You know, even with his relatives, there was a sense of rejection and isolation. And oftentimes I really saw the scriptures in a new light. Wow, Jesus was isolated. God willingly put himself in a place where he actually felt loneliness. And I've been feeling lonely, but I have never felt this lonely, you know, if I'm being honest. So right now we have the privilege of having an interview with one of my dearest friends and sister. She's from our church in London. She recently moved from the church in Boston after being there for a couple of years. And Hannah is the most incredible woman. Not only is she extremely intelligent, she got her master's. We were in the same undergrad. I'm not tooting my university. I'm praising her master's degree even more, because she went to Oxford to study and do her master's in Victorian literature. So she loves God, but she's also extremely driven, ambitious. And she's been a disciple since 2009. So she studied the Bible and really committed to following Jesus. And I thought that she could share today because of just the things that she's been experiencing in her life. And I have just been so inspired by you, Hannah, because of the way that you've been able to handle difficult feelings and how you've allowed them to change you, especially in this area of loneliness and isolation. So I just really look up to you. But most of all, thank you for sharing for us today. It's such a privilege to have you, honestly, for taking time in your holiday to be with us. So let's welcome Hannah with a virtual clap, everyone.
Come on, Hannah.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so special.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
was there in person, but
Thank you, Hannah.
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So I just felt like you were the perfect person to share about, you know, being an online Christian, experiencing loneliness in the pandemic, and also just for several other factors too. Because up until a few months ago, you were working and living in Boston, right, with people that were fairly new to your life, and then your family was in the UK, so you were also kind of stranded. So how was that for you? Were there times where you felt lonely?
Yes, I think the initial move to Boston, I was 23. This was in 2018. That it was hard. I remember showing up to church. It was a new church region for the first time, and no one greeted me. No one came up to me and said hi. And I just remember feeling like, oh, I'm gonna have to be the first and kind of initiate. And it was funny. I told a friend back in the UK, like, oh, I had this church service. I didn't feel really welcomed. And she was like, what was the name? And then she said that was the most unfriendly church I've been to. And I was like, great, this is going to be my home for the next 3 years. And she said it was like the worst region. It's changed a lot since then, which I'm grateful for. But I think I realized that if I needed friendships, I had to make them and go after them, and really let people in. I also had to have surgery shortly after moving to Boston, less than a month after. And that was intense too, because I was far from home and didn't understand the American healthcare system. And yeah, I remember the church though really came through for me. And I couldn't be independent because I literally couldn't even sit by myself after this surgery. And I remember a woman at church like being there in the hospital room with me, and she said, it's okay to cry, you know. And after she said that, I think it just gave me permission to like, I just started weeping. And I think it wasn't just the surgery, it was like the whole month of my, like the transition. So I think that ended up being a great thing when I look back on it though, because it forced me to really rely on people and watch them become family, because people took me in. And yeah, I'm really grateful now for the friendships that came from that time. But initially it was hard. Yeah.
I actually forgot that your surgery was a month after you moved. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So feeling that loneliness first of not being able to connect immediately, and then having to go through, like, I remember you were not someone that had had to go to the hospital a lot, you know? So yeah, experiencing that was hard. So in this pandemic, what's been the hardest thing, Han, with regards to loneliness, isolation, and being an online Christian?
Yeah, I think it's been a hard year for everyone. I think I had definitely a few transitions even within the pandemic. After I got comfortable in that church, I actually moved to another region in September of 2020. And so it was kind of like starting over again, but online, which was weird because people didn't actually know me. I'd never actually been to an in-person service. And so I think it's easy to get lost when you're just another Zoom box. And even just the structure of church being taken away, I think that exposed how much security I was getting from the structure. Even I'll see these people at church, or I'll connect with people then. Even the events will kind of set that up for me. And so realizing I have to be intentional now. I also got engaged during the pandemic last May, and I thought that was hard. All of us kind of, at some point, I'm sure, I've had milestones that have kind of gone uncelebrated. And so that was weird having that happen away from my family. And I thought that was going to be the hardest thing. 8 months later, I actually ended up ending that engagement. So that was in January. And that was the most difficult, definitely painful thing I've ever done. And so it was two big things at once. And so then I had to kind of experience grieving in a pandemic, which again, I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably had to do too. And I think that was probably the first time, this is probably coming into my 4th year in Boston, that I felt homesick. Just not having the support system that I had grew up with, going through probably the hardest thing I'd gone through up until that point, and not even be able to like hug people, just the small things that you take for granted, or have a sleepover with the girls, you know. I think something that I learned, I know you mentioned like isolation. I actually had to really learn the difference between isolation and solitude. And actually there's a great book that I was reading at the time, The Celebration of Discipline. It's kind of an old book, but he has a whole chapter on the discipline of solitude. And I realized I needed solitude, and that was kind of intentional time with God. And I think about like Jesus going to the wilderness after John the Baptist died, his cousin, and kind of needing that time of refreshment. But I also had to recognize the times when I was calling it solitude, when in fact I was isolating myself. And there's a difference. I think there were times when I didn't want to let people in because it felt vulnerable. And there's a quote that I love. I think it's actually Timothy Keller, that he says, and you can't be fully loved unless you're fully known. So I realized I was kind of depriving people of actually the chance to love me by not allowing them to know me and know what was going on. And so I had to really be intentional about letting people know me, which was really hard when you're going through something tough. So that was probably the hardest thing. Yeah.
And thank you so
Wow.
much for sharing that. Yeah,
Wow.
I'm just very inspired by what you shared. You know, I think what was it like? Like obviously you were sharing about if you can, you know, you were sharing about the difficulty of just not wanting to give people a hug and not being able to do that, or just like, you know, and I love the point about the difference between solitude and isolation, right? Because they're both solitude is very important, and then we also have to guard our hearts as well to let ourselves be known by others. So what helped you take those steps of vulnerability? You know, because I know sometimes people feel like, well, when I go through a hard time, I don't want people to feel sorry for me, you know, but at the same time, like I genuinely do need help. So what was it like, just going through the ups and downs of that breakup that you felt like you would never even go through, you know?
Yeah, I think I just knew that I needed people, even though it didn't always feel like it. And so I think that helped push me to be vulnerable. And I think about I had to find safe places, and not everyone will feel safe. But I think even you sharing about Jesus, and I love that he like let people in to his sorrow. When I think about like Gethsemane, and he didn't have the whole crew of the disciples there, but he took James and Peter and John, like his inner circle. And I realized, wow, I need to find an inner circle like that. And I think even when I thought about sharing tonight, even like David and Jonathan, I know Sonia, that was kind of, I felt like you were definitely that for me in university. And we made like a David and Jonathan pact, just to like be there. And I love how Jonathan found David in the wilderness, and like it says that he helped him find strength in God. And I feel like I've realized I need that for every season, and every transition. I need to find that kind of a friendship. And yeah, so I definitely went out of my way to look for those people. But it definitely, when you talked about just, the emotions of just going through a breakup, it was tough. There was a time where I just would consistently wake up in the middle of the night, like sad or in tears. And it was like 4 a.m. every night. I could almost rely on that was going to happen. And I remember calling our mutual friend in London who's a doctor and just being like, I think I might be depressed. And just even not being afraid of that and that language. I actually spent Valentine's Day reading this book called Shattered Dreams in an empty coffee shop, which probably looked hilarious to people sitting in the coffee shop. But it was something, and maybe I'll share some of the things I took from it, but that was a great life-altering actually thing to read for me at the time. Something that the book kind of talks about is how God cares more about our joy than our happiness. And this was a really hard thing for me to actually wrestle with. And he talked about the differences, like happiness is more circumstantial, whereas joy is like deep. It's like found in God. And the book talks about how sometimes he'll take away the things that make us happy if it forces us to go deeper for joy, and find that in him, which is a really hard thing to think about. And I didn't realize until it was taken away how much of my happiness I was getting from the relationship, or the feeling like, oh, my life is progressing, and just the security that brought, and rather than in God. And I think that exposed that. But yeah.
That's amazing. I think even for whether you're a mom or you're busy with work as a young professional, I think, you know, that time to really be refreshed by God is so important for all of us. And thank you, Han, for sharing to us how you let God in the process of that. Because I think sometimes it's easy to say, yeah, just let go and let God, right? But what does that actually look like through our hardest time? And that, you know, you did have ups and downs throughout the process. So my fourth question was, how did you find security despite the intense loneliness? But I think you've kind of shared a little bit. And for the sake of time, maybe lastly, could you share how can someone, what can you advise for the sisters, like for me, for those of us listening, how can someone pursue spiritual growth online right now, being an online Christian? How can we practice our faith? What are some advice that you would give to us women? You know,
That's a big question. I think you guys already kind of touched on it about like admitting to yourself your emotions and just being honest with yourself. And I realized that actually I needed solitude for that, to kind of really sit and be real with how I felt and not suppress it, and kind of allow myself the space to feel what I was feeling. And I think I wasn't good at that at first. I remember I booked a hotel actually to kind of escape around Valentine's Day and just have a retreat with God. And it was so sad because I ended up spending it binge watching The Queen's Gambit, which is a great series. I realized this, and that's not rest, that was escaping actually.
Yeah.
So then I kind of had to realize, no, I need to connect and actually allow myself to feel it, which is hard.
Yeah.
And I think when you're honest with yourself, and then you can share with others because you've processed alone what you're feeling. And so I think that would be another thing I'd say, just really make an effort to be known, even if it's just to a couple, like kind of those safe people and those safe places. I definitely needed that.
Yeah.
And I think being there's so many things I feel like I've learned. Embracing the season you're in too. I think I've realized we can spend a lot of time wanting to be in a different season than we're in. And I didn't realize how attached I was to a timeline. And I'm sure maybe you guys kind of relate to that, where you have this idea of, oh, at this point I'll be married, or at this point I'll have kids, or at this point I hope I'll have a house or a stable career. And it never stops, that kind of chasing or wanting for the next thing. And so I think I learned to really enjoy. Weirdly, I got to a place where I was able to feel like I'm okay in this valley because I see what it's producing in me. And I think of just James 1, where it talks about consider it joy when you face trials because they produce perseverance and maturity. And often we want those things, but don't want the trial that takes us to the maturity or the perseverance. And so embracing this season, which is so hard, but embracing even what it's producing in us. But yeah, and I think lastly, I guess, how can we practice our faith? I think we have to be intentional is something I've realized, that we can't rely anymore on the familiar like church structures, which actually I think God's teaching us a lot in this time. I think it's personally helped me to be more thoughtful and like actually think, why do I do what I do? Like one example is even taking communion. Like now, oh, someone's not passing a tray around, I'm in my home. What's my conviction about communion? And that's something I wanted to study out more. And I think even just being creative too about meeting others' needs. And you guys touched on that too, like being able to kind of look outside of yourself. And actually, I think of that proverb, he who refreshes others will be refreshed. Because often I realize if I feel isolated and I've felt lonely, then how many other people are feeling that too. And I appreciate there was one sister in like the young professionals ministry where I am who actually put together a spreadsheet over the Christmas of all the women in the church that lived alone. And she kind of sent them all an email like, can I bring a dessert to your house? Or like come over and bring something. And she thought like a couple of people would respond, and it ended up being that the team went to 45 houses in the region. And some people were like, I don't want a dessert, I just want you to come and stand at a distance and we'll talk. But I love that she kind of was intentional and creative about meeting someone else's needs and just the joy that produced.
That's amazing.
So
that's incredible.
There's
probably a few single brothers that wanted a free cake out of that. Try to sneak their name.
Yeah, she didn't include the brothers.
Using a female's name on there.
Yeah.
But, wow.
No, that's incredible. We can totally imitate that.
That's incredible. Hannah, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, I think there was so many great, points that came out of your sharing, whether it's the difference between isolation and solitude, or whether it's this difference between resting and escaping and allowing yourself to be known in order to be fully loved. I mean, there's so many great things that I think we could take out of that. And so just really grateful for you being so vulnerable, being so real with us in sharing what you shared. I mean, you didn't have to share some of the things that you just shared, but you did it because I see how secure you are in God, actually, in the way that you just shared that. And so, yeah, I've also known you for a long time, Hannah, but I just see you growing from strength to strength every time I talk to you. And I
Yeah.
know God has the right guy out there for you, but you're also resting pretty secure in him. And I think, you know, your heart is definitely in the right place, and it's just super inspiring, I think, to see that. So thank you, Hannah. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Do
Thanks
stick
for
around
having
for a
me.
while if you can.
Yeah.
But now we're going to go to our second speaker of tonight. We just had a Brit share, so now we're going to go across the pond and have a American share for us. That is, of course, the one and only Jeffrey Scholz, who is now quickly becoming a local as he's learning Bahasa. Just a few weeks here, and he's already picking up Bahasa, which is pretty amazing. But how are you doing, Jeffrey? How are you doing this evening?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you also agreeing to be our speaker tonight. And
Absolutely.
yeah, really appreciate you doing that. So I thought we could kick off with just kind of finding out a little bit about yourself in terms of your personality. You know, how would you describe your kind of the way you build relationships or interact with others, maybe today, but also before you became a Christian, came to know Christ? How would you describe that?
Well, in my early days, so before I knew Christ, I think I was the complete mirror image of someone like Sonia or Calvin. And I think I can just illustrate it with a couple stories about what I considered to be fun. So when I was about 8, I just moseyed over to the library and picked up a book on algebra just to teach myself, because, oh, that sounds complicated. I want to learn this thing. So of course, that's not something you can do unless you really just enjoy spending a really, really long time with yourself.
That's true.
Around 14, I think I did the same thing with programming. So I was just like, oh, this looks interesting. Let's see if I can program this computer. So pick up a book and then spend days upon days just by myself working on this new thing. And then when I was 16, I was just like, calculus sounds hard. Let's try that. So I think, yeah, so you can imagine I didn't have a lot of friends back when I was in high school.
The books were your friends.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my that was my natural personality. I hope that anyone I've interacted with doesn't see me that way anymore, because that's been that's certainly probably been the primary area that I had to grow in, just to do the basic things about how, love your neighbor as yourself. And later on, even just when, you're working, so I worked in for Yahoo.com back when I was in America. So it's a fairly large corporation. And obviously you can't get very far without at least having some modicum of relationships. And I was still learning at that point. But yeah, I think that should sort of describe where I was and where I came to. But yeah, obviously I needed to learn how to, if I was going to reach out to people or serve people, that you can't just be a librarian. So
what was it like for you, Jeffrey, trying to learn how to build relationships, go out of your comfort zone, particularly maybe joining church or like you shared about in the office environment? How did you kind of learn to overcome that kind of, introspective personality?
What was it like? Actually, it doesn't feel that different from what I'm going through now, trying to adjust to a new language and a new culture out here. Which, makes sense, right? If you spend most of the time with yourself in a very small set of people, then that's one culture. But among everybody else, that's a different culture. So how did I adjust? Well, primarily what made me push through it, at least initially, was I would just not be able to walk the Christian walk that way. And so there wasn't any choice. And so I had to go forward with it anyway. And, it's eventually just like any, I think, this might sound really cold, but like anything, it's a skill that can be picked up, I think. So it's something you can be more comfortable with as time goes by. And then once you learn to actually genuinely love people, then it becomes straightforward, more obviously that becomes easier after that point.
Right. What helped you to see the benefit of kind of overcoming your kind of inward focusedness and building relationships, being more outward focused? How did you kind of see the benefits of that?
So, well, it's still something that I'm learning. Actually, that's a huge reason I ended up choosing to go to Jakarta initially. So as I had been going through life, there are 3 sayings that have really stuck with me when it comes to relationships. One is the first one, which I'm going to revisit later. The first one is you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That's, and I'll elaborate more on that later, but if you think about it, it makes sense. The second point is, I heard this saying, which I haven't forgotten. It says, your network is your net worth. So that's pretty powerful if you think about it. And the third one is Proverbs 13:20, which says, walk with the wise and become wise, for the companion of fools suffers ruin. So now about Jakarta and about why that first quote had really stuck to me. So being so dedicated, so I worked in the tech industry, so it's certainly easy to be spending a lot of time by yourself. And I was pretty obsessed with my career leading up to the pandemic. And, you know, it had gone well and I had gotten a lot of security out of it. And a lot of my identity was tied to that. And I think slowly, I had been drifting away from the faith. Most of my sphere of influence was with work or whatever I thought would make me successful rather than serving the kingdom of God. So come 2020, then the world comes to an end and the church is not doing that well. And I'm thinking like, man, why am I sticking around church? I was seriously considering leaving church and religion entirely at that point.
Wow.
And again, I felt like, okay, I had a kind of a bit of a selfish mindset. Like, okay, if this isn't helping me get through this disaster, then, you know, why am I spending time doing this? But, you know, I could see, okay, well, it's me. I can't blame God for my perception of how good or bad church is. And clearly there's something missing in the way that I've been living my life so far. And at this point, I had already read the Bible like at least 5 times through and more spiritual material than I can count. So I knew by that point that I wasn't just going to read a book and then, you know, find my footing again. It was, I needed to learn something that you can't learn from a book. And that's when that quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, stuck to me. And I was just like, okay, well, I clearly need to put myself in a new environment where I'm not obsessed with this job that I've put most of my security in, and I need to be around a church that's going to help me, or at least a group of people who are going to help me, because that really wasn't available at my time and circumstance. So that's when I decided to go to Jakarta. And in the process of that, started talking to Tasha, and then now we're dating. So that actually worked out, thankfully, in that regard.
I like the, and now we're dating.
So
that's great.
Which, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely thankful for that, because trying to move to a new country without someone to hold your hand figuratively and literally, it's already, I don't know where I would be without her support. Wow. So so I guess, well, that's another aspect of relationship, but yeah, that's what I know. It might seem, Jeffrey, I didn't know it would be PPKM when I came here, but
no one knew.
But nonetheless, I mean, I think it's still fulfilled the original intent, which was, you know, I wanted to be around people that I aspired to be like, and now, wow, yeah, I've gotten that in abundance. I mean, home Harlem's right across the street, so that's awesome.
Oh, that's amazing. It's amazing to see how God blessed that step of faith, and how, you know, your heart was really to want to experience, you know, coming out of your shell in a sense, right? And being challenged to grow. And I think it's amazing to see how you've seen the impact of relationships in your life too. What do you think, coming on to more about this kind of pandemic and being an online Christian, which is the theme for this new series, right? What for you has been the greatest challenge of, obviously you've been, part of our church for now 12, 13 years, right? What's been the greatest challenge in the last couple of years or so, or less, of being an online Christian?
Well, initially, when I think that changed as time passed by, because I lived in New York City when the pandemic first hit, and that was outside of Europe and China, that was one of the first places in the world to shut down. So during that time, I definitely experienced what I think a lot of people are feeling now. And naturally, I was just like, okay, well, I have more time on my hands and I'm not seeing anybody. So I used social media a lot more than normal. And at a certain point, I think around May, I was just like, okay, this is too much negativity. I need to cut back on this a lot. So I pretty much stopped using it cold turkey at that point. But what it did show me after that was like, wow, I actually don't know what's going on in any of my friends' life. I mean, I have a simulated view of it regularly, but it's not actually, I'm not the sort of person who will naturally just, let's chat on Zoom. And so, it's easy if you just check Facebook or Instagram or something. It's just like, okay, my brain is fooled into thinking I know what's going on in your life. And so when that was taken away, and then there's no midweeks, right? Then I had to learn, okay, I have to be very deliberate about building these relationships.
Right.
So that was that. I'd say that was probably one of the bigger transitions with the online thing. I mean, I guess the thing now is, as I have to watch out for is not fall back to I can spend all the time doing whatever I want now because I have all the time and it's just me here. So making sure that I don't go to my natural default, I think is at least the one I have to be vigilant with.
Wow, that's great that you have that awareness. And again, relationships is what helps. Accountability is something that we also get through close relationships. And so we can have people that can tell us when we are reverting back to our unhealthy self. So I think that's a great point too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So just final question for you, Jeffrey, how can someone pursue spiritual growth in these times, right? Sometimes we feel like I'm just not going to grow. I'm just stuck and I'm just going to have to keep my head down and just keep going through it. But what do you think from your perspective, moving into a different church as well, whilst we've been doing online, how can we pursue spiritual growth in our lives right now?
Well, I mean, our spiritual growth has two dimensions to it, right? One is our relationship with God, and the other one is our relationship with other people. So for me, in the pandemic, I think it can be very much, I can spend time with God. I spend a lot of time reading the Bible and whatever. That part comes somewhat naturally to me, but the horizontal aspect doesn't come as naturally to me. And I think for other people, it's probably the other way around. So what I think one way to look at it is, if I think for a lot of people like myself, being in a large crowd of people can be a bit overwhelming. But now there's all the opportunity in the world to socialize and get to know people without a large crowd of people. So in a funny way of looking at it, this is actually the opportunity of a lifetime in that regard. And I think for people who have the opposite natural tendency, where, okay, I just naturally want to spend a lot of time with people and I feel kind of agitated sitting here. Well, then, maybe that can be a time where you have more opportunity to focus on the vertical relationship and maybe read parts of the Bible that you haven't before, or study something that you haven't before. So that's, it certainly creates a lot of hassle, but it also creates other opportunities too. So I would take advantage of those.
Awesome. That's great. Good points. I like that. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate what you shared. So many good points, I think, as well from what you shared just now about trying to overcome that inward focused kind of nature, and seeing the power of
Yeah.
relationships, seeing the importance of them, and God working through that, and
Even
and
when it's
blessing
not
them.
natural.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
when it's not natural. Yeah. So that's amazing. Thank you, Jeffrey, so much for sharing. Thank you to our guest speakers. Virtual round of applause for them. Really grateful for Hannah and Jeffrey. And we're going to close it up now before we go over to the breakouts. We just want to close up just by summarizing, what is the remedy then? We have a God that chose to relate to us, and how he can also comfort and heal us in our loneliness. So, as our speaker said, social distancing doesn't actually have to truly distance us. We can still invest in relationships if we see the importance of them in our lives. So these are some steps towards healing from loneliness. Just to quickly kind of go through them. It's okay to not be okay, right? I think that's the starting point.
Korean drama.
It's okay to not be okay. It's okay if you are feeling this, and you don't feel completely okay. That's okay. Admit that you are lonely. Talk about it. Be able to open up about it.
Yeah, that's the hardest step.
And that is often, the most difficult part. Be willing to step out of your comfort zone. And if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, you're not willing to be truly healed. I think in order to really experience God working through this time in our lives, is being willing to step out of our comfort zone. Avoid digital fatigue, so you can actually have refreshing times online. What is digital fatigue? Sometimes when we're tired, we binge watch Netflix, but yet our eyes are still focusing intensely on a screen. And there's actually such a thing as digital fatigue, when our eyes just, and our head just gets so tired from looking at the screen. And so I think try to be aware of that, so that you can still maintain the things online that actually you can get benefit from. Laugh. Do things that make you laugh. Engage in activities with people, have conversations with people that make you laugh. It's Proverbs talks about this.
And research.
And research does too, that laughing is actually like medicine to our souls. So it's good to laugh. Avoid the negative spiral. Don't get caught in negative thinking. Be able to kind of find a way to break through that. And acts of selflessness. Research has shown that doing acts of selflessness actually has powerful positive benefits for our mental health.
Yeah.
So find ways to do something, even if it's just a small act of kindness. I mean, Hannah shared that example from the church in Boston. What could you do? It doesn't have to be a grand act, but what act of selflessness could actually help you right now to break out of your inward focused nature and isolation? Have a think about that. That's something for you to do in your own time. I wanted to share a few examples of Psalms, but we're going to skip through that. I can send that out in the slides. Later, we're going to go to discussion groups now. So we're going to have the breakouts arranged. And these are the questions just to guide you guys. This is just a suggestion for you. What, if anything, from today's talk resonates with you? And have you experienced anything similar to what was discussed? And then secondly, how have you previously coped with feelings of loneliness or isolation? So this is just a suggestion for you guys. We really hope that in the breakouts, you can share your lives, share your own story, share your feelings on this topic, your experience with it. What have you been going through during this pandemic that you can relate to in terms of what's been shared tonight? And definitely, we hope that you'll make some new friendships, some new connections, so that, we can build this community of God together. For those of you that are interested in kind of studying the Bible and wanting to get deeper in your spiritual life, do get in touch with one of the breakout room leaders. We do offer personal Bible studies just to help people in their faith. But for now, we're going to open up the breakout rooms, and do stick around, guys. It would be great to have a lot of people join that. Before we do that, let me close it up with a word of prayer. Let's pray to our God. Father, thank you, Lord, for this topic, this time that we can discuss, Father, that we can just have great vulnerable sharing from both of our speakers tonight, from Hannah, from Jeffrey. Father, we're so grateful for them giving their time and their hearts to share their lives. We pray, Lord, that through the breakouts, through the fellowship, through just a time where we can be vulnerable ourselves, we can also be real with one another, Father. Even though we may not know each other extremely well in these breakouts, that we can just take a moment to just be real and just share where we're at, Father, and where we hope to be with you too, Father. God, thank you for this Gem Talk. Thank you for this time. We just pray that you're with us tonight and that you continue to guard us. Pray for the pandemic to continue to get better and for the cases to keep going down as we go through this lockdown. And we just pray, Lord, that we can look forward to times of being refreshed in person, of being able to encourage each other in person too, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Great. Thank you, guys. We're going to open up the breakouts. Do stick around.